So, what exactly has happened over the last week? Well, as we discussed earlier in the week, the UK government, just before we did our fundraising stream, came out and said, "Oh, we're not going ahead with conversion therapy ban because we're worried about unintended consequences when it comes to trans people. There's things there we don't think we can deal with this through legislation or regulation." And everybody said, "To hell with that. That's bullshit." There was broad public backlash against that. And very shortly after that, they came back and said, no, actually, we're going to go ahead with the conversion therapy ban, but we're only going to go ahead and ban it on the basis of sexual orientation. We're not going to ban it on the basis of gender because we think this has unintended consequences for trans young people and children. And we discussed that in previous streams. The fact that that's bullshit, the fact that it's easily disproven, and importantly, the fact that, well, it's not really a ban at all. And I wanted to start with that briefly. Just because it's important. Conservatives and supporters of this selective ban on conversion therapy argue that it is acceptable for trans people to continue to be exposed to conversion therapy because banning it would outlaw important types of assessment that young people may need as they're going through gender transition, whether that might be questioning about their gender as a young person. And it's just too complicated. It's just too complicated to ban that as is. Now, we discussed as to why that is bullshit. However, let's take a look at the specific language these people are using. How about the Health Secretary for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? How about the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid? What's he saying about all of this?
That we ban the so-called conversion therapy for LGBT people. When it comes to trans, I do think that we need to be more careful. You asked me again as health secretary. In my mind is, for example, is the recent report by Dr. Hilary Cash. She's one of the most experienced pediatricians in this country. She just published an interim report just a few weeks ago, and she talked about how children and young people, when they say they have gender dysphoria, it is right for medical experts to be able to question that.
Just listen. Really open your ears for this next one, okay?
And to determine what the cause might be. Is it a genuine case of gender identity dysphoria, or could it be that that individual is suffering from some child sex abuse, for example, or could it be linked to bullying? So I think it is right to take the approach that we have, which is to ban conversion therapy for LGB, but to take a much more sort of sensitive approach when it comes to trans.
That is the Health Secretary of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland saying, "We are not banning conversion therapy because we think some kids who say they're trans have suffered sexual abuse." We are just need to go over this again. Just need to go over this one again. We're okay with exposing children and adolescents and young adults, and this is an all-age ban, but mostly children and adolescents who have experienced sexual abuse to emotional abuse and coercive control, which is what most forms of conversion therapy, what they actually materialize as, just in case they're not trans at all. Okay? That's what's being argued here. If you really sit down and look through it all, that's what's being argued. And you might argue, well, no, actually, no, it's for talking therapies. Some children are confused, and we need to explore their feelings with them and see where this is coming from. Some people transition for different reasons. That's not the case at all. Banning conversion therapy does not prevent anything when it comes to open discussion with children or young adolescents or young adults. If they have concerns or questions, or they need to talk about things, it doesn't prohibit any of that whatsoever. Because what defines conversion therapy is coercion. It is going in with a bias to prevent a behavior or to impel a change in behavior. Asking questions without that bias and with the consent of the individuals involved and exploring topics is very unlikely to be conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is thrust upon children and young people, mostly, also some adults, by their families, by their communities, by their partners, as a way to impel, to a way to coerce, a way to force a change in behavior, or a change in presentation, or a change in identity. It is institutionalized gaslighting. It is institutionalized abuse. The idea that you would use the very real suffering and very real trauma of children and adolescents who have been sexually abused to allow the abuse and trauma perpetration towards more children and young people is perverse. It is an evil. And I'm being very careful with my thoughts here because we have Twitch terms of service to contend with. But I've had very, very different words in private, shall we say. It's very difficult to find people who have gone through conversion therapy who stand up at the end of the day and say, I like that. You have to wonder why that is. Because most forms of mental health treatment, even those who are the most controversial, even things like electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, which is provided on the NHS in the UK, even the most controversial mental health treatments have their proponents and supporters, which include people who've experienced them directly. It takes a very long time to find people who have been through conversion therapy who are openly supportive of it. Very similar to autistic communities, actually, trying to find people who have gone through extended applied behavioral analysis and support it on the other side of that. The reason for that is because they're essentially the same practice with different intentions, invented by the same group of people using the same techniques. As also pointed out by Danny Zebra, going through extended conversion therapy also reduces the likelihood that you are still alive today. Because the impact that conversion therapy has on people's mental health can be devastating and lifelong, inescapable given the material conditions that people find themselves in after escaping or being able to leave conversion therapy programs. I very rarely get angry when streaming. But that sentence that our esteemed health secretary uttered yesterday certainly rendered that emotion. Another aspect to this that I wanted to get to, and Chad has beaten me to it, which is great, because it means you're thinking about it, is I'm sure there's a world where children who go through sexual abuse are actually trans. They would have been regardless. And that assumption's actually pretty correct. I know a couple of people myself, some of my friends knew they were trans before they experienced sexual abuse. I know a couple of other people who found out they were trans afterwards. Childhood sexual abuse isn't uncommon. Unfortunately, it's one of the great evils perpetrated against children. One of many in the UK, I must point out. Poverty being the biggest one. But we need to ask as well, what are we telling those kids? What are we saying to those children, to those adolescents going through their teenage years? That this core part of your identity is something we're just not going to reflect in how we interact with you? We're not going to support you with this? Like, you would have got support with this if you hadn't have been sexually abused as a child? Is that what we're saying to kids? Certainly seems like it. Do we want to tell kids that? Do we want to tell kids? Yeah, if I struggle to come up with analogy here because it's so disgusting. But do we want to be telling children that because they went through sexual abuse and trusted somebody to tell about it, that because of that, will not support them or will put them through additional traumatic steps in recounting that, in explaining that in grisly detail, and putting people through additional hurt and suffering. Is that what we want to say to kids? This is the Health Secretary of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, a country of 70 million people, justifying the continued ability for professionals and community leaders to torture kids because they've already been tortured. I mean, okay, if we're doing that, cool, I guess. But it is very difficult to legally word my thoughts on this. This is how callous. This is the level of callousness that we're dealing with here. This is the level of vitriol that we're dealing with here. It is a poison in the minds of these people. It is an evil to frame things like this. This 1 minute 9 seconds has been the most disgusting part of the last week for me personally, in terms of researching this and keeping track of it all. By far, if there's anything worth getting most angry about in all of this, it is perhaps this. Conversion therapy is an evil. Conversion therapy is so corrosive to people's sense of self. It is so corrosive to people's self-integration, to their ability to participate in society, to their ability to trust other people, especially authority figures and people who they did trust before. It is so corrosive to people's humanity. People recover from it. It doesn't remove people's humanity. People who go through conversion therapy are no less human beings. But that's through spite of it, not because of it.